Hello again, and thank you for joining us. I'm happy to present two more of March meeting papers today. For those who were not able to join us yesterday, March meeting papers are a series of essays selected from an open call announced in 2019, inviting artists, writers, and thinkers to expand on Okwui Enwezor's influential thinking about the biennial as a platform to engage with history, politics, and society. The series revealed the extent to which biennials have contributed to the realization of new narratives and experiences of modern and contemporary art. All papers are now accessible in a digital format in the March meeting open call section on our website, sharjahart.org. Our next presenter is Murtaza Vali, a critic, curator, and art historian based in Brooklyn and Sharjah, a recipient of a 2011 Creative Capital Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant for short-form writing. He regularly contributes to art periodicals and publications for nonprofit institutions and commercial galleries. He is also an adjunct curator at Jameel Art Centers in Dubai, where he curated the widely acclaimed inaugural group exhibition Crude, which explored the relationship between oil and modernity across West Asia. Vali is currently curating a series of exhibitions about intimate infrastructures in the Gulf entitled Substructures Excavating Our Urban Everyday at Warehouse 421 in Abu Dhabi, and is part of the artistic team for the 2021 Front Triennial in Cleveland. A visiting instructor at Pratt Institute Brooklyn, he is also a lead tutor of Campus Art Dubai. I would like to invite Murtaza to present his paper. We will be taking questions from the audience in the final 5 minutes. Simultaneous translation to Arabic is available in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noura, and thank you to Sheikh Ahour and Sheikh Sultan and everybody else at the Sharjah Art Foundation for inviting me to present my paper and my ongoing thinking and research on camp and Sharjah in relationship to the Indian Ocean. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. And then, okay. Does that look right, Noura? Okay. I'm going to hope that it is. Okay. In his introduction, 100 Horizons, the Indian Ocean in the Age of Global Empire, historian Sugata Bose suggests that the devastation caused by the 2004 tsunami reiterated, albeit tragically, the fact that the Indian Ocean might be better understood not as a space of separation, but as one of contact and exchange, a traversable space that throughout history has linked the distinct cultures and lands that surround it. For Bose, the ocean functions like a continent, a mass that can be mapped and studied historically, whose watery expanse facilitates unique forms of cultural transmission across it. His approach bears similarities to Paul Gilroy's influential theory of the Black Atlantic, which posits that a focus on narratives of displacement and travel, as well as on the deterritorialized space of the Middle Passage across the Atlantic and the metaphors it carries with it, troubles traditional notions of culture, whether racial, ethnic, or national, that are tied to territorial entities and their carefully policed borders. For Gilroy, the sailing ship is the key chronotope or organizing symbol of the Black Atlantic. Quote, living microcultural, micropolitical system in motion, end quote, that connects lands otherwise separated by bodies of water. Presented at the 9th Sharjah Biennial, Wharfage, a project by CAMP, a Bombay-based studio for transdisciplinary media practices, examined a minor maritime trade route between Sharjah's old port and the various semi-state entities that then comprised Somalia. This trade was conducted exclusively by wood-hulled, diesel-powered, mechanized shipping vessels, the modern avatar of the traditional dhow, the sailing ships indigenous to the Arabian Gulf, South Asia, and East Africa. On preliminary research trips, camp was drawn to the port, located along the eastern bank of the creek, where dozens of dhows would dock to load and offload their cargo. Historically, this was the commercial heart of the city. An old covered market, colloquially referred to as the Irani Bazaar, ran parallel to the creek, now separated from the dock by the modern shoreline road. The surrounding area has become the city's art and heritage district and home to both the Sharjah Art Foundation above and the Art Museum below. CAMP's project emerged from open-ended research conducted in and around the port by simply talking and listening to the people whose lives and labors were tied to it. Conversations revealed that the boats were mostly made in and operated out of Salaya in Gujarat, a region of West India famous for building such boats. The crews were largely Muslims from there, and their boats regularly ferried cargo between Sharjah and various ports in Somalia. Of particular interest was the way this less informal infrastructure of maritime trade continued to operate and flourish under the radar of the modern shipping industry. Its humble, more human scale, allowing it to sidestep concerns related to profit margins and security. These DAOs seem to thrive precisely within the interstices and the caesuras of the broader industry, safely and successfully navigating waters that larger ships avoided because of the threat of piracy. The research also revealed a complex triangular network of commercial and cultural exchange that crisscrossed the Indian Ocean and that is millennia old. CAMP presented their research in two formats, a book and a radio event, an object and a performance, a diptych of sorts. Distributed freely, the book's form is deceptively simple. It opens with an essay outlining the theoretical triggers of the project. Photographs documenting the various sites visited during the research phase, the shipbuilding yards in Salaya, and the wharfage in Sharjah are interspersed throughout. The bulk of it, however, is lists, 15 months of shipping manifests presented chronologically, inventories of the cargo that DAOs departing to and returning from Somalia were carrying. This information, buried deep in files at the port's customs office, was extracted from the oblivion of the bureaucratic archive. Treated like an objet trouvé, the data was fundamentally unaltered, merely represented in a format that made it accessible and intelligible. A computer program was quickly developed to efficiently enter and process the data into a streamlined, easily understandable output. Each vessel's name and manifest number, the flag it was flying, its destination, and the number of days it docked at the Sharjah Creek were listed on the top left of each entry, followed by a list of the types of goods carried, their quantity, weight, and value. Black type was used for trips from Sharjah, blue type for the return to Sharjah. A list of the names and flags of all the vessels documented was followed by a litany of all the different goods transported, presented as an alphabetical appendix at the back of the book. The manifests revealed the material particularities and distinct dynamics of this trade route, highlighting both links and imbalances, cultural, political, and economic between its two poles. As historian Fahad Ahmed Bishara reminds us, quote, there is no reading the Dao, the account ledger, or the trading manual as somehow separate from the world of circulation that generated them, end quote. All kinds of consumables, used and new, from cars and x-ray machines to food and medical supplies, were sent to Somalia, indicating a hyperactive import market there. Boats returned to Sharjah with loads of charcoal or stone, or often empty, indicating a scarcity of exportable product. Additionally, this minor trade route operated out of Sharjah's old port rather than the modern deepwater Port Khalid close by, because of the older facility's low wharfage fee, which was then free for the first 6 days and a mere 20 dirhams per day thereafter. The project's title not only acknowledges the physical site at which this transnational economy unfolded, but also indicates its specific scale and scope, which necessitated this particular site as the location where these transactions were conducted. Named Radio Mina after the traditional name for the old port, the performance consisted of 4 nightly pirate radio broadcasts during the biennial's opening week, conducted at the MSV Nazre Karam, which was docked at the port then. The festivities attracted dozens of people working at the port and in its immediate vicinity, many of whom became regular participants. It brought together the different ethnic groups involved in this minor trade economy: the Gujarati crews, the Sindhi loaders, the Sikh truck drivers, the Somali traders, the Iranian shopkeepers from the adjacent bazaar, and the occasional inquisitive Emirati official. Despite the cultural differences, the realities of trade, the need to communicate, to initiate and complete a transaction, facilitate the emergence of a common language, Hindustani, which was surprisingly spoken and understood to varying degrees by many of the different parties involved. Hindustani is a proud mutt of a language, a hybrid of Hindi and Urdu that rejects the fundamentalist pieties of their respective Sanskrit and Farsi roots, and distills their commonalities into a vernacular widely spoken and understood across much of the northern Indian subcontinent. It is also the language of Indian popular films, whose global reach has helped the familiarity of it to spread far beyond the subcontinent. The programming at these events was open and improvised, shaped largely by the desires of the different stakeholders linked to and by this trade network. CAP served as facilitators, managing the technical side of the broadcasts, establishing formats that encouraged participation and dialogue, conducting interviews, and drawing out characters. People talked about their work, their day-to-day lives at sea and at the port, using the ship's onboard VHF radio, through which sailors talked to their families back home. Communication was established with crews at sea as close as Oman and as far away as Bosaso on Somalia's northern coast. Music and songs were exchanged, downloaded off cell phones, and subsequently broadcast. There was singing and dancing, both surprisingly good and gut-wrenchingly bad. But it was not smooth sailing. There was often friction, as one might expect, as conversations across ethnic divisions, language barriers, and class differences ensued. CAP maintained a conscious antagonism to the biennial and its audiences, who were kept at a remove. Instead of an overt presence within the biennial spaces, an outdoor listening station was set up on the roof of the building currently housing the foundation's offices, accessible only by a wooden ladder marked with an easily overlooked 8 by 10-inch sign that simply stated Radio Mina, 100.3 FM. Here one found a hodgepodge of contemporary furniture to sit on, copies of the book, and radios tuned in to the broadcast. Other similarly outfitted listening stations were set up at irregular intervals on both sides of the Corniche Road, but were not distinctive enough to attract the attention of biennial visitors unfamiliar with the area. These stations primarily serve to expand the broadcast's target audience, draw in additional participants, and provide spaces where participants in previous broadcasts could listen in on the current night's proceedings. Repeated over 4 evenings, the broadcasts created a ritualistic space for cross-cultural conversation, carving out a forum for dialogue, exchange, and intersubjective encounters. What emerged from these encounters was a portrait of the port as a complex nexus for the exchange of people, goods, works, and ideas between the United Arab Emirates, Iran, South Asia, Somalia, and beyond. For 3 hours each night, these broadcasts temporarily brought into view the hidden textures of maritime trade, giving voice and agency to people, cultures, and languages normally marginalized in the Emirates. It provided the participants with an opportunity and format through which to exercise the full political potential of their voices, to speak, sing, and tell their stories, yes, but also to be heard, to be acknowledged. Key to the project's politics was its strategic use of radio, a technology that, at least historically, has held the promise of utopian possibilities and democratic potential. Additionally, it is a technology intimately familiar to the crews who spend long periods out at sea. Radio's unique ability to carry forth, to transmit, to cross physical boundaries and distances, to project voices beyond the body's immediate physical surroundings and the space of dialogue, amplified the participants' sense of subjective agency. It also tapped into the romance and melancholy associated with the radio, of the voice carrying across space, its waves skimming the ocean's waves below, simultaneously evoking a sense of both distance and connection. Over the last 2 decades, nearby Dubai has been branded and promoted as an exemplary neoliberal multicultural city, where a consumer-driven cosmopolitan lifestyle and thriving luxury tourism industry bring together people from disparate nations and cultures. Wharfage functioned as a parody of such cosmopolitan networks of leisure and consumption, exclusive spaces to which most of its participants would certainly be denied access. Instead, the party was held in public view, open to anyone and everyone, allowing its participants the opportunity to control their own leisure and structure their own pleasure. It instead celebrated a parallel subaltern cosmopolitanism, based not on the wants afforded by privilege and capital, but on the needs of poverty and labor, where the months spent at sea or in foreign lands, away from one's family, is necessary for one's livelihood. The transmissions established a sonic free zone, where the freedom proffered was not that of unregulated offshore duty-free capitalism, typical of the economic free zones that have come to define the region, but a freedom of expression otherwise unavailable to its participants. The broadcasts literally allowed for the amplification and projection of the excluded voice. And as events that garnered attention, they made the temporary community that emerged around them visible from within Sharjah's urban fabric. They created, if only temporarily and symbolically, the possibility of a democratic public sphere in a social context that, despite its multiculturalism, remains stratified along class, race, ethnicity, language, and gender lines. Might we consider them to be, to use Okwi's theoretical formulation that Geeta discussed earlier in the week, be activations of the civic imagination? Camps from Gulf to Gulf to Gulf, a film made over 4 years, collaboratively and in dialogue with the sailors they first met and befriended during the Radio Mina broadcasts, premiered at the Biennial's 11th edition. While Wharfage excavated custom records and shipping manifests to focus on goods transported, from Gulf to Gulf to Gulf tracks their movement and the everyday lives of the people who helped move them, spinning a film out of the transnational, multilingual, multi-ethnic networks that CAMP uncovered during their initial research. The film is a feature-length montage. Shots extending over a couple of minutes are rare. A string of smaller units, it weaves together 3 distinct filmic registers. Low-resolution footage, found footage, almost always accompanied by music, that is shot by and circulated amongst sailors on their mobiles. 2 sequences captured on Handycam by CAMP's many collaborators during their voyages, and 3 shots on land at ports of call taken by members of the research studio. The film's concatenary structure mimics the seriality of its title. Unlike a conventional travelogue, the film does not follow the adventures of a particular ship, crew, or sailor. The eye behind the camera is always multiple. The views it captures and presents come together to form a portrait of a seafaring community and the many other networks and communities with which their lives and livelihoods intersect. The itinerary outlined in the title is the primary protagonist, driving its narrative arc and determining its shifting spatial coordinates. The film follows the Gujarati seafarers' annual journey, beginning and ending in the shipyards, harbors, and alleyways of their hometowns of Salaya and Mandvi in the Gulf of Kutch, taking them to and between cities around the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Aden. But by leaving out geographical qualifiers, the title posits Gulf as a landscape typology, an interchangeable geographical feature frequently encountered around the Western Indian Ocean littoral, visualized through carefully labeled shots of the many ports of call that are part of this maritime network. Similarly, though numerous ships feature in the film, each diligently identified by name, when they appear in the frame, and are repeated again as a list. Each diligently identified by name when they appear in the frame and repeated again as a list in the end credits. The mechanized shipping vessel emerges as a titular gulf, as a type, a chronotope that culturally defines the contemporary Western Indian Ocean world, as wind-powered dhows had done for centuries before. Bishara has noted how, in its establishment as a national icon across the Gulf, the dhow has been emptied of the depth, complexity, and texture of its trans-regional oceanic histories, of the economic, social, and material ties that have bound and continue to bind the region to South Asia, East Africa, and beyond. It has, instead, been transformed into a receptacle for nationalist projections and nativist closures. By transposing the undeniable fact of a vital present onto a quickly narrowing view of the past, CAMP's Indian Ocean projects repopulate the dhow, making visible and audible the unruly, cross-cultural, polyglot nature of the maritime trade network it sustains. As one might expect in a film about the sea, there are shots looking out from the deck at the open waters, at the horizon, at the shifting coastline, at ports of call. This is the colonial or imperial, quote-unquote, view from the boat, a panoramic perspective that long dominated representations of maritime space through much of art history. However, either before or after the camera looks out beyond, it turns in on the ship itself, panning around the bridge and the deck to show fellow crew members and capture moments from everyday life of both labor and leisure, on board and at sea, from catching fish or skinning a goat for food, or cooking and grooming themselves, passing time by playing chess or cards, sweeping and washing the hold after transporting livestock. Maritime space here does not only ever extend outwards toward the horizon, but contracts to include the unique space and time of the boat itself. As the historian Eng Seng Ho reminds us, for millennia before the advent of Western colonialism, countless other boats traversed the Indian Ocean. And From Gulf to Gulf to Gulf is a film about and crafted by these others. The camera acknowledges and valorizes this network of alterity by frequently focusing its gaze on other boats. I'm going to try to play a clip of the film for you all here. Hopefully, it works. This is the opening clip of the film, just to give you guys some sense of it. So the film, like the book, is also available to view online. Music and song are key features of the film. The pixelated shots of ships at sea are a type of found music video. Visuals overlaid with mostly filmy songs made on and circulated amongst sailors on their cell phones. And even when songs are not dubbed over footage, we see the sailors themselves singing, lip syncing, and play acting along to them. The film's opening sequence establishes this as an important leitmotif, showing two sailors miming theatrically with a knife, a gesture of self-reflexive performativity repeated in other ways later in the film. A gesture of self-reflexive performativity repeated in other ways later in the film, it puts the evidentiary claims of the documentary footage that follows into play, pun intended. The songs all speak of love, longing, and loss, expressing the unique heartache of separation from the beloved, be it home or kin, that is shared by both sailor and migrant worker alike. The occasional devotional song, almost always also of filmy origin, appears over footage of a sinking or a burning ship, like a sonic talisman that implores the divine for protection against the ever present perils of the seafaring life, or that mourns the loss of a sister vessel, a melancholic reminder that neither safety nor success is guaranteed. Beyond their shared subject matter, it is the capacity of sound to resonate far beyond its origin, and of music and song to gather and sustain community that links the two projects. Like Wharfage, Camp was strategic about how their film was exhibited, projecting it publicly so that it could attract a broad audience and be enveloped by Sharjah's urban fabric. It screened nightly at 8 after the evening prayer at an open-air cinema located in a vacant lot at the corner of Bank Street and Corniche Road, across from the old Dow port. The film, especially the footage shot in Sharjah, seemed to eerily and seamlessly extend off screen and onto the neighborhood where it was shot, projecting itself onto the adjacent urban space. The handful of times I attended screenings, I was pleasantly surprised by the number of locals in the audience, mostly lower and middle class migrants who live in the aging buildings surrounding the site, both curious first timers and regulars who seemed familiar with the film and stopped by for a momentary distraction, to watch a favorite sequence or to hear a favorite song again. The songs known to many in this audience were a definite draw. The screenings reminded me of the Radio Mina broadcasts. Like those 4 nights of radio revelry at the port, they both enacted and revealed an otherwise marginalized community of shared cultural knowledge, social memory, and sensory and affective joy. The transience of this community should not be understood as a shortcoming of either project. It simply acknowledges the fact of migrant life across the Gulf, for whom quote unquote civic imagination rarely crystallizes into permanent presence. Camp's pathbreaking work presciently anticipated the recent oceanic turn in Gulf history and historiography, as well as within the art world, both across the region and globally. This recent shift has begun to draw the Arabian Peninsula out from the margins of a Levant and North Africa-focused history of the region and into the arena of the Indian Ocean world. Yet, despite growing recognition of Sharjah's cosmopolitan maritime history, it is important to acknowledge that Camp's projects would be almost impossible to conceive of today. In the months following wharfage, the Dhow port was moved to the opposite side of the creek, where it abuts Port Khalid and appears to have been spatially incorporated into its secure and separate facilities, possibly making it easier to regulate what previously was an organic and unruly exchange of people, goods, languages, ideas, and cultures. For the sailors, the city is no longer an open port of call, but a secluded space that requires an additional journey across water to access. The shift was part of a process begun in the 1990s to rehabilitate the city's decaying historic core into a tourist-friendly arts and heritage area. This process is captured in From Gulf to Gulf to Gulf as the once vital dock is transformed into an empty construction site and excavators unceremoniously moving around piles of sand. And the 2013 screenings often felt like uncanny visual echoes, reactivating the collective memory of the old port, a ghostly reminder of how the neighborhood had been and was being transformed. As architect Samia Rab has argued, a Khaliji port city like Sharjah historically presents an urban logic distinct from the more familiar Islamic urbanism found across much of the rest of West Asia. This urban typology, which she calls seascape urbanism, is defined by an openness to the sea and a wall that separates and protects the settlement from the harsh desert hinterland. That narrow strip of land where dhows were loaded and unloaded and where the Radio Mina broadcasts happened, what Raab designates as the Sahel, marked the threshold not only between maritime and territorial conceptions of space, but also of identity, between the fluidity and pluralism of cosmopolitanism and the hardened contours of emergent nationalism. Before the Corniche Road bifurcated this area, the Sahel fed directly into the back of the adjacent souk, the Dhaw's cosmopolitan maritime world spilling out into the vibrantly polyglot Indian Ocean Bazaar, which is Bishara's designation for spaces of cross-cultural trade found across the Indian Ocean littoral, where the demands of business necessitated an ease with translation and proficiency in multiple languages. The relocation of the Dhow port has irreversibly severed the centuries-old spatial continuity between maritime and territorial lives and rhythms, commerce and culture. Though it might be small and unobtrusive, the metal railing that now marks the water's edge symbolically cuts the city off from its maritime past, rupturing the previously organic relationship between transnational and local mercantile networks. The Indian Ocean world has been sequestered to the horizon, thus becoming part of the view across the water. The once vital and hospitable cosmopolitan interzone has been transformed into a gentrified, tourist-friendly pedestrian drag. The lived intimacy between land and sea is now irretrievably sealed off as past, as heritage, to be exhibited and performed for international and domestic visitors alike. Unexpectedly, the former site of the old Dhow port has become what Pierre Nora has called a lieu de mémoire, and Camp's Indian Ocean projects unintended memorials. Recognizing their present impossibility allows us to mourn the disappearance of Sharjah's maritime pasts. While growth and change are inevitable, as the city continues to expand away from its coast, what is gradually being eroded is the deep and rich history of its openness to water, to the Arabian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, and the limitless cosmopolitan promises of its 100 horizons. Thank you.
Thank you, Murtaza. So taking questions from the audience now. We have a question from Qasim Sabah, which is directed to the artist, but I think I'd like to hear your views on it. Does Camp consider their approach anthropological or artistic? And to follow up with that question, from Uzma Rizvi, to follow up with the question, do you consider their work in general an approach to participatory as an activist gesture or as a political aesthetic?
Wait, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So the first question from Qasim is, does Camp consider their approach anthropological or artistic? And the follow-up question from Uzma is, do you consider their work in general and approach to be participatory as an activist gesture or as a political aesthetic?
I think I can answer both. I feel bad speaking on behalf of CAMP, but I definitely don't think their approach is anthropological or ethnographic, although there are aspects of that are used in the way they conduct their projects. I think in response to Uzma's question, I think they are both aesthetic and political gestures. There is always a politics involved. There is always an interest in visualizing systems or structures of urban space or of communities that otherwise remain marginalized or invisible. But the participatory aspect is also a way of involving those communities within their own representations.
Next question, did this project intentionally reckon with rising nationalism around the world? Or your point of view from your perspective?
I don't think so. Actually, I think it had very much to do with initially Wharfage was very much to do with how this minor maritime trade network operated within a space of within waters that were otherwise not being traversed by major maritime networks because of piracy off the coast of Somalia. And I think the camp was really interested by that kind of interstices within the modern major maritime network, how this kind of like minor network was managing to operate within the cracks, and hence was valuable to the people on the two sides of the trade network. I don't think it's actually a response specifically to nationalisms. That's my take on it to some degree. And it's not about nationalism per se, it's about how a national identity is constructed, which is, I think, a slightly different point.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Murtaza. We will reconvene in 10 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, did the film not work?
The film did not work, but a link to the film
sorry.
is available in the chat box.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it would work. My apologies.
Okay, so people can access the link from the chat box at the screen now.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.